This video is brought to you by you and your support of This Week in Videogames.com, our 100% ad-free website that provides daily news coverage, reviews, features, op-eds from industry experts, release calendars, and so much more. We've actually just rolled out comments on the site, so now supporters can start having conversations, and that's just the first step in our plans to make This Week in Videogames.com the best place to discuss what's going on in the world of video games. Sign up for free or become a paid supporter for heaps of benefits like newsletters, exclusive content, and more. A big thanks for your support, and now, on with the video. Gamers, I am back down under after a whirlwind trip to GDC in San Francisco. Too much to cover in an intro block, but if you want to hear about my adventures over there, then the latest episode of the Friends Per Second podcast is the place to do it. Link below the like button for that one. TLDR though, played some cool games, met some cool people, and finally realized that Stu, our team member, really does look a hell of a lot like Robert Irwin. Son of the late great crocodile hunter himself, Stu's actually a trained actor, by the way, so when it comes time to finally make the movie about Steve Irwin's life, Hollywood, be sure to give our boy a call. All right, so what else? Nothing really. Let's get to the news, shall we? A couple of wild stories this week, but we'll start off with Subnautica 2 since it's an incredible turning point in a story that we followed for many months last year. So to quickly recap things, basically in the middle of 2025, the co-founders and leadership team of Unknown Worlds, the studio behind cult classic Natural Selection, and best known for their underwater survival game Subnautica, were suddenly ousted from the company with whispers of the in-development Subnautica 2 being delayed. The game's publisher and parent company, the studio, announced a delay for Subnautica 2's early access build and posted an announcement on their website saying that the leaders had neglected their duties. At first, a lot of people were like, uh-oh, those guys must have really fucked up. But the leaders very quickly filed a lawsuit against Krafton to say that no, actually, Subnautica 2 was ready for early access and that Krafton had fired them to avoid paying out a $250 million bonus that they had promised to the leaders when they were acquired for $500 million back in 2021. The bonus was contingent on hitting revenue targets, but Unknown Worlds had a better than expected year and were poised to hit that target with the release of Subnautica 2. Now, there were a lot of accusations exchanged and details reported and leaked throughout the months that this was all going on, but this week it all culminated in a Delaware court ruling in favor of the ousted leaders and concluded that yes, Krafton's main goal was to avoid that massive payout and that it manufactured a bunch of justifications to fire the leaders, seize control of the company, and delay Subnautica 2 so the studio wouldn't meet the targets. The ruling document is public, so you can go read it for yourself if you're so inclined. But I'll tell you right now, the wildest part of all of this was the bit that goes into how the CEO of Krafton asked the in-house legal team if he could get out of the bonus agreement, and they were like, yeah, no. And then he proceeded to ask ChatGPT what to do, and then he assembled a task force to execute ChatGPT's recommendations. Do you remember that Krafton is the company that proudly announced that it was becoming an AI-first company a little while back and offered voluntary redundancies to anyone who wasn't on board, which is such a good shot and chaser combo since it seems like the AI-first CEO is soon going to find himself on the breadline owing to using a little too much AI in his day-to-day. So what's happening now is that the court has ordered the outed Unknown Worlds CEO, Ted Gill, to be immediately reinstated, given the keys to Steam, and he's now free to proceed with the early access release of Subnautica 2 when he deems appropriate. And almost immediately, a release window was set for May this year. The two co-founders, Charlie Cleveland and Max McGuire, have not been reinstated though, seemingly because the judge thought that putting Gill back in there was going to be dicey enough. The court has also ordered that the period for which Unknown Worlds will be tested for the revenue targets to meet that contractually obligated bonus will be extended to September of this year, and the leaders also have a right to extend that even further to March 2027. Absolutely huge. The show is not over yet, of course. Not only do we have the launch and first year of Subnautica 2's early access to watch in order to get to the conclusion of this story, there's also going to be a second phase for the trial where the court will determine if all the stuff Krafton did last year messed with Unknown Worlds enough to warrant additional damages. So yeah, fascinating end to the first chapter of this saga, but bottom line, we're playing Subnautica 2 in May. I absolutely cannot believe it, and I could not be more pumped because Subnautica remains to this day the greatest survival crafter of all time, and now its sequel is just around the corner. The legal shenanigans are fun, don't get me wrong, but playing Subnautica 2, that's where the real fun is. At least I hope so. God, can you imagine if it sucked? The Krafton CEO will be like, see, I told you, while also having to pay $250 million because even if Subnautica 2 does suck, we're still buying it. Somehow Krafton was not the main character of gaming news in the last week though. No, that privilege has gone to Nvidia, who revealed their new DLSS 5 tech at GTC, their big AI conference. Now to be clear, the best part of this entire discourse is the dunks, but there are so many of them and they are so good that we've decided to save them for the feel-good story for the week, so do stick around to see those. For now though, let's just deal with the straight facts. Past week, Nvidia revealed DLSS 5, which is their new AI-powered upscaling tech. Now I'm going to keep this super high level because this stuff can get pretty technical, but long story short, DLSS is a technology that uses AI to reconstruct images while using less local compute. It allows you to play at higher resolutions and higher frame rates while also getting an image that looks better than what your hardware could natively render without the help of DLSS. It's controversial tech in enthusiast circles, but for most of us, it's generally been net positive, with other companies like AMD and PlayStation doing very similar things to get the most out of their hardware. DLSS 5 is a new set of technologies that are generally focused on lighting improvements, at least according to Nvidia. Whether or not that's true is a matter of great discussion right now, since the changes here on Grace's face are certainly a lot more than just lighting changes. And this is where we need to start getting into a little bit more detail, because DLSS 5 does have a few components, and generally speaking, its changes to environmental lighting are less controversial. Some have argued that the lighting is a little too blasted out, that it's too heavy-handed with the way that it deploys additional lighting, can result in scenes losing their original feel. But that's sort of been an issue with a lot of different lighting approaches and technologies over the years, so there's nothing too new there. No doubt the tech will continue to be refined over time, but the environmental lighting component of DLSS 5 has some potential, or at the very least, it doesn't set off alarm bells like the face stuff does. And this is where we get to the most controversial part of DLSS 5, what it's doing to faces. Now, from the jump, Nvidia said that this was technology that was focused mainly on lighting, and that the underlying geometry of an asset wasn't being altered at all. And it was immediately hard to believe that, because while Grace's face structure might have remained the same here, her features and her makeup are wildly different, resulting in a character that looks not only different, but also more generic, as though Grace's face was run through an AI filter with the prompt, make it look better. And since AI models thinks that makeup makes it look better, on it goes. At the same time, Nvidia were insistent that DLSS 5 is a tool that developers can utilize or not, and that they have a lot of control over how it's utilized and what outcome it produces. To quote an Nvidia press release directly, quote, DLSS 5 provides game developers with detailed controls for intensity, color grading, and masking, so artists can determine where and how enhancements are applied to maintain each game's unique aesthetic, end quote. There was also an interview with Tom's Hardware where Nvidia's CEO Jensen Huang said, quote, all of that is in the control, direct control of the game developer. This is very different than generative AI. It's content control generative AI. That's why we call it neural rendering, end quote. Honestly, I don't know what Jensen was saying there, so we actually put questions to Nvidia directly, and we did get some responses back. Firstly, we asked them, to what degree does Nvidia's DLSS 5 automatically make changes to a character's face when it's utilized by a developer? Here's what they said to us, quote, DLSS 5 is an SDK that gets integrated by the developer into their game. When integrated, DLSS 5 infuses pixels with photoreal lighting and materials by using an AI model trained to understand complex scene semantics, including characters, hair, fabric, and skin. Developers can then tune settings, including intensity, color grading, and masking, to determine precisely where and how AI-powered enhancements are applied, ensuring that the final visual result maintains the game's unique aesthetic and artistic intent, end quote. There's a lot in that response that we want to come back to, but for now, we wanted to drill down into this developer control thing. So we asked them, the Grace demo that we saw, was that Capcom using these tools to render this version of Grace? Or was this something that Nvidia put together using their new technology? Here's what they said to us, quote, the visual improvements seen in the demo are a result of DLSS 5's technical capabilities. This is a very early look, and we expect developer art teams will make further adjustments prior to release to best align to their artistic intent. DLSS 5 is not shipping until fall, so developers have time to tune settings to match their desired aesthetic, end quote. So they didn't say that Capcom made this Grace. You get the impression that Nvidia did this using their technology, but that when Capcom does eventually start working with it, they can use DLSS 5 in different ways to deliver their artistic intent. Most importantly, we asked them, does DLSS 5 pull solely from the data contained within the game software, or does it also draw data from external models? And furthermore, if it does draw from external models, are those dictated by Nvidia or the developer, or a mix of both? Here's what Nvidia said to us, quote, DLSS 5 uses a game's color data and motion vectors for each frame as inputs into the model at inference time. The DLSS 5 model and its training data set are defined by Nvidia, end quote. Now that response is important because Nvidia did not say that the model is solely trained on the game data, which leads us to believe that it's also trained by other sources of data, which would mean that potentially Instagram makeup influencer face data is rolling around in there with Grace's actual face data, and the result is a Grace that looks like one of those higher fans memes that surface from time to time. So these responses didn't fill us with a lot of confidence. At the same time, I saw a video from YouTuber Daniel Owen, and he also got responses from Nvidia that make it super clear the DLSS 5 is not just some new lighting. It's almost certainly a face filter style tool that is pulling data from external sources to rebuild and sometimes yassify faces, in some cases adding things that weren't there at all, like this sideburn hair on this Starfield character that wasn't there in the first place. So look, I know this is a lot to take in, it's very technical, and you might be like, what's the big deal here? The faces look a little different. Isn't more detail better? I think Owen really hit the nail on the head in his video where he highlighted this scene where Grace is going to visit a crime scene where her mother was murdered years ago. And in the yassified version, Grace is wearing makeup, which is probably not what you'd be doing if you were going to visit the place where your mother was murdered. The character looks a certain way because of what they're doing and where they're going, and an AI tool cannot know that because it's just looking at individual frame data. The obvious response to this is, well, developers will choose how they use it. But these tools have a habit of becoming pretty relied upon by developers, and we might be facing a future where characters just look like this because the tools are so convenient and ubiquitous that developers just kind of default to using them, similar to the way that most developers utilize Unreal Engine to make their games despite its performance issues, and then rely on DLSS to get it running at a decent frame rate, even on high-end hardware. So yeah, it's complex, but it is important as it directly relates to the intersection of artistic intent and graphics technology. DLSS 5 is not due out till later this year, and I do wonder if Nvidia are considering a delay now after this backlash. I'm sure we'll be talking plenty more about this in the months and years to come, so stay tuned. One of the developers running point on the DLSS 5 stuff was Todd Howard. He loved it, but that wasn't the only reason he was in the news this week, since this was the week that Bethesda lifted the lid on a bunch of new stuff for Starfield, which obviously met a pretty lukewarm reception when it launched a number of years ago. Well, it kind of feels like Bethesda are hoping for a bit of a cyberpunk Phantom Liberty moment here, this week announcing that 1, the game will be coming to PS5 like we always thought it would, on April 8th, so very soon. 2, it's getting a paid story expansion, and 3, it's getting a big free expansion that adds a lot of the stuff that the game really probably should have had at launch. Chief among these is interplanetary cruising, meaning that you're not just fast traveling to each planet, you're actually flying around in space and encountering obstacles and items and resources. And there's also some tweaks to the New Game Plus system, which lets you carry some items over so that those repeated runs aren't such a drag. Now, as part of the press tour for this reveal, Todd gave a few interviews at Bethesda HQ, and in IGN's Conversation, Howard started talking about the uncertainty of knowing how early to announce these updates and balancing community expectations, to which the interviewer, Michael Hine, rightly replied, all right, so what was with that Elder Scrolls 6 announcement then, huh? Todd then said, quote, and you cannot make this up, my God, quote, just pretend we didn't announce it. Doesn't exist. No one's heard a word. End quote. Todd, my guy, I am sorry to tell you, but no one is letting you off the hook for that logo reveal. Even 10 years after Elder Scrolls 6 actually comes out, people will still be referencing it. To be fair, in the same interview, Todd did hint that the logo reveal wasn't his preference, and he does have a faint preference for shorter windows between reveal and release, so it is kind of funny that the longest lag between reveal and release in video games history is a moment brought to you by Todd in that handsome leather jacket. So Todd wishes he could take it all back. That's also something that Arc Raiders developer Embark seemed to be working on too. At GDC last week, GamesIndustry.biz published an interview with Embark's CEO Patrick Soderlund, who dropped the tidbit that the studio has re-recorded some of the lines that were initially performed by AI voices at launch. Now obviously, Arc Raiders, fantastic game. Hard to argue if you've played it. The AI voices in Arc Raiders, not good at all. Everyone hates them. But Embark has stuck with them because that's kind of what they do. They also used AI performances in their last game, The Finals. They were terrible there as well, by the way. They've always framed it as a cost-saving thing, saying that they're making AAA games with a fraction of the budget. And that's something that Soderlund repeats here. But we've spoken to voice actors and audio engineers in the past about this very topic, and they basically call bullshit, saying that recording voice work can be very quick and easy and cheaper than you think. By the way, if you want to read that full report, it's over on our website, thisweekinvideogames.com. I'll leave a link to it below the like button. Anyway, maybe it's the runaway success of Arc Raiders that has encouraged Embark to go back and do things right. But in this interview, Soderlund frames AI voice use at Embark as a sort of production tool to test lines without recording, and then recording them later, saying, quote, "It's a way for us to work, not replace actors. We don't necessarily believe in replacing humans with AI all the time," end quote. But then again, that's kind of exactly what they did. Anyway, he went on, quote, "There's a quality difference. A real professional actor is better than AI. That's just how it is," end quote. And that is true. And look, I have long advocated for Embark to do exactly this, replace the AI voice work with real human voice work, and then just take the victory lap. Since you're essentially neutering one of the biggest criticisms of the game, I think this is a great move, and fingers crossed the next time they ship a game, it has no AI voice work at all. But I suspect that might be a little too much to hope for. And did you guys catch Jeff Unchained this week? Jeff Kaplan, best known for his work on World of Warcraft and as the director of Overwatch back in its prime, announced a new game last week. It's a first-person survival game set in the Old West called The Legend of California, developed with his new indie studio, Kintsugi. This is very much unlike anything he's worked on previously. It's a first-person survival game set during the Californian gold rush in the late 19th century, which is kind of filling this broad but underserved niche, and it actually looks like kind of really good. But what I want to focus on here is both his 5-hour podcast interview he did with Lex Friedman, which is full of amazing stories about his time at Blizzard, and the 10-hour-long live stream he did while playing Legend of California. And clearly, Papa Jeff is just living his best life now that he's not representing a huge AAA company, because there were some fantastic insights and tidbits to come out of both of these events. The biggest one, I reckon, was his story about the straw that broke the camel's back about his exit from Blizzard. Here, just listen to this.
For me, like what sort of ultimately broke me in my Blizzard career was I got called in the CFO's office, and he sits me down and he says, he gives me a date, which at the time was 2020 and was going to slip to 2021, but at the time it was 2020. And he said, Overwatch has to make in 2020. And then every year after that, it needs a recurring revenue. And then he says to me, if it doesn't do dollars, we're going to lay off 1,000 people, and that's going to be on you. And that was just the biggest fuck you moment I had in my career. It felt surreal to be in that condition.
Now, the dude he's talking about here is Blizzard CFO Armin Zerza. And for more fascinating insight into this period of Blizzard, I do recommend you pick up the book on it written by Jason Schreier. It's called Play Nice, The Rise, Fall, and Future of Blizzard. Very eye-opening. But moving on to Jeff's own marathon live stream, he had a bunch of wisdom to impart, like this one on the nature of toxic criticism. Roll it, Stu.
I never understand being hostile about it or being rude about it, but I understand being upset and I understand voicing your opinion. But like, if a game comes out and you don't want to play it and you've never played it, shut the fuck up. No one cares. Like, we don't need to hear that you weren't into it.
Clearly, Jeff given absolutely no fucks at this stage of his career. God bless. There was also this tidbit about how he wanted WoW to be first person.
I really wanted WoW to be first person. I argued a lot for that. And I think WoW is great being third person, and like there's a lot of arguments about seeing your character more and whatever. But I had come from EverQuest, and in EverQuest, like they had this like weird third person camera that didn't really fully work that great. You didn't play with it on. But EQ is all first person.
Other tidbits include a lot about his 34-person studio, including the fact that the guy who did the physics engine for Angry Birds also worked on the physics engine at Blizzard, the fact that the server for Legend of California lives in someone's closet, and the fact that most of the team gave up high-paying jobs because they believed in this game, and they're building an 80 square kilometer map with no AI. And the reason he did a 10-hour live stream?
I kind of wanted to stream the game a bunch because I feel like when we... Oh, that's so cool. That looks awesome. I feel like when we pitch it to people, they think we're like lying or something. Like, yeah, it's this massive world and it takes 30 minutes to get from one end to the other, but there's like cool stuff to do all over. And so I just want to show people like it's real, it's not fake. Like, and I know Alpha's going to be soon.
Man, this is almost like a bonus feel-good section. This man is the reason that so many people loved Overwatch, and it was a bummer to see him leave Blizzard, and it's a bigger bummer to hear the kind of shit that he was clearly putting up with while at Blizzard. But man, it's good to see him now living his best life. At least I hope he is. Legend of California will be coming to Steam eventually, but no release date just yet. You can sign up for the alpha playtest right now though. I'll certainly be checking it out when it drops. A quick lightning round to finish off. GDC this year apparently saw a 30% drop in attendance according to GamesIndustry.biz. Just 20,000 attendees compared to the over 30,000 both last year and the year before, which many are putting down to how reluctant international developers are feeling when it comes to traveling to the US. And you know what? I get it. GDC also played host to 2 award shows which are judged by game developers themselves, and the first was the Independent Games Festival Awards, which saw Titanium Court win the Grand Prize and Excellence in Design Award. Now, this game was only announced when the nominations for this award show were announced, but anyone who's played this demo, including Stu and Ed on our team, can't stop raving about it, so it sounds well deserved. Other winners included Baby Steps for Audio, Perfect Tide Station to Station for Narrative, and Horses for the Innovation Award. The second award event was the Game Developers Choice Award, which saw Anne Roger win the Audience Award, Blueprints win Best Design and Innovation, and Claire Obscure Expedition 33 win 5 awards, including Art, Narrative, Debut, Audio, and Game of the Year. Next up for those guys, the BAFTAs, where Claire Obscure has a whopping 12 nominations, including Game of the Year. The winners for this one won't be announced until the event mid-April, but you know what? I definitely wouldn't bet against them, because at this point, they've won Game of the Year at literally every single major game awards event. I don't see the BAFTAs breaking the trend, to be honest. While we're over in that part of the world, we'll mention that PEGI, their classification system for games, has updated its guidelines to have increased default age ratings for games with predatory mechanics like loot boxes, in-game purchases, and daily quests. Games with loot boxes will be classified PEGI 16 by default. In-game purchases that are time limited will be PEGI 12. Games with daily quests will be PEGI 7, but if you're punished for missing one, it'll be PEGI 12, and games with blockchain or NFT systems will be PEGI 18. Be nice if they were banned entirely, but you can't win them all. The stuff follows similar moves here in Australia and Germany, and you'd think that EA would be in shambles because FIFA is now rated M here, but you know what? I think they're probably doing okay, so don't shed any tears for them. Save them instead for the workers at Warner Brothers Games Montreal, some of whom this week were laid off. This is the studio that put out Batman Arkham Origins and were then charged with making Gotham Knights amid a greater live service push at Warner Brothers. Since then, they were helping out with the now cancelled Wonder Woman game, and amid that and all the other cancellations, studio closures, and general troubles at Warner Brothers Games, not to mention the big Warner Brothers buyout of Paramount, I'm sure things could stand to be a little better over there. We've reached out to Warner Brothers to try to get a sense of how many people were affected. We'll let you know if we hear back. Rolling through some big numbers now, Resident Evil Requiem sold 6 million copies in 2 weeks, making it the fastest selling title in the series. Silent Hill 2 Remake this week hit 5 million players, that's including copies shipped as well as people who played it on a subscription service. And Slay the Spire 2 hit 3 million copies sold in just 1 week and about 50 bazillion hours played according to whatever hours tracker you want to rely on. And finally, to wrap up this section, I want to throw it over to our very own Stu Kimball, who got the chance to play 2 hours of Pragmata a few weeks ago and just put up a preview over on our website this week in Videogames.com. Now, a bunch of us got to play the early demos for this one at Summer Games Fest, and while we thought it was kind of cool, those demos were very short and we came out of it being a bit like, okay, how long can this mechanic hold up for? Well, Stu reckoned Capcom have actually got something really good going on here. I'll let him tell you though. Take it away, Stu.
My perception of Pragmata has changed drastically from the first time I saw it. I was always excited by the hacking gunplay, but not sure if it could hold more than a few encounters. Now, all I want to do is jump back into perfecting my hacking skills, optimizing my loadout, and seeing what new and intimidating enemies Capcom has to throw at me. There were multiple times that Pragmata put me in tight spaces with all of these disparate enemy types, and the mental math of figuring out who I was fighting, who was getting too close, how to best position myself to do optimal damage, which weapon would best dole out that damage, it left me forgetting how to breathe at times. That feeling had me extremely excited about the potential of what was waiting further down the line. I'm enthralled by the different areas of the lunar station, especially the new larger themed areas like the New York themed space I was in. Pragmata has taken notes from Capcom's greatest hits like Resident Evil 4, but carves its own path as an experience that proves every element from hacking to storytelling to enemy and level design are firing on all cylinders.
So what got announced or delayed this week? Well, the Future Games Show Spring Showcase happened last Friday. We won't go through all the games revealed since there's simply too many of them, but there were a few that caught our eye. With Square Enix putting out the next Life is Strange game this week, you might wonder what the original developers at Don't Nod have been up to. Well, Aphelion is their next title, a narrative game about 2 people stuck and trying to survive on a distant ice planet. This one's got a release date April 28th for PC, PS5, and Xbox Series consoles. You might also be wondering, hey, I wonder what those guys from Imagine Dragons are up to. Well, would you believe me? me if I told you that they're making a video game, or at least funding a video game? It's true, they're making a 5v5 third-person capture the flag game. It's called Last Flag, and it has a sort of 1970s aesthetic. Austin played this one at some point last year and was surprisingly impressed by it. It's got a release date of April 14th of this year. Good luck to those guys. Lord knows, launching any type of multiplayer game right now ain't easy. Like Life is Strange, the Little Nightmares series has kind of taken on a life of its own after the original developers decided they wanted to do their own thing again, and the latest development on that front after the mildly disappointing Little Nightmares 3 is Little Nightmares VR, Altered Echoes. Don't worry, I hear you VR diehards out there cheering, or 4 of you, as you log into the Facebook metaverse one last time to say goodbye to all of the friends you didn't make. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. Altered Echoes is being developed by a studio called Iconic for PSVR 2, Steam VR, and Quest. These folks previously made a VR table tennis game called King Pong, which went into early access on Steam but seems to have been abandoned as of a few years ago, as well as a VR hunting game on Quest that does not have great reviews. So let's tread very cautiously around this one. Wanted to also mention this new Friend Swap game that was announced last week that hails from our end of the world. Acting Out sees you and a bunch of friends filming movie scenes on virtual sets in real time, including all the voice performances and actions. It's the kind of thing that can only result in disaster, which I guess is the entire appeal, since watching the final product in the cinema together is part of the gameplay loop. It's coming to Steam Early Access, but no release date just yet. Moving on to delays now, and we've got a reverse delay this week, and that's from Lego Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight. This is the new one from the Lego game folks at TT Games, and it's an open world affair starring this pint-sized version of Batman, which the kids seem to love. It's been moved up a week to May 22nd. Love to see it, and will release on PC, PS5, Xbox Series consoles, and Switch. Hopefully this is good as the Skywalker saga, especially since it feels like this might be the only new Batman game we get for a very long while, given everything happening at Warner Brothers right now. All right, so what came out last week? Well, let's kick things off with John Carpenter's Toxic Commando, which seems like it did a pretty good job of bringing back those Left 4 Dead vibes. It's got a fair 73 on OpenCritic, but judging by the reviews, I don't think anyone should be put off by that if they've got a good group of people who enjoys these sorts of games. Here's Aaron McKinley at Game Rant, who gave it 8 out of 10, saying, quote, "Poppy horror flicks aren't the only inspiration Toxic Commando wears on its sleeve. Its straightforward, no-frills approach is a throwback to the horde shooter of old, namely Left 4 Dead, which can feel like a breath of fresh air today. It takes things back to basics, while adding just enough polish and attitude to keep it distinct. All in all though, fans of cheesy humor and zombie co-op shooters will find plenty to love in it. John Carpenter's Toxic Commando is not a game changer, but it doesn't pretend to be, and it's all the better for it," end quote. Surgeon Studios put out a new game on Steam Early Access last week, a so-called co-op extraction platformer called Fix Force, but it seems to have really flown under the radar with not a whole lot of Steam reviews, sadly. Just 14 reviews at the time of writing, but hey, they're all positive at least. Here's NPC_Christian, who has 3 hours in it so far, saying, quote, "If you enjoy games like Lethal Company or Repo, but want more chill and forgiving gameplay, then this is a great pick. My biggest gripe about those games was that if you get taken out during a run, you're basically just sitting around watching the rest of the time, which for me was a real downer. The shared live system paired with the ability to rebuild your squad mates is a huge plus. Excited for the future of this game and never expected the hundreds of hours I put into Tears of the Kingdom would be so useful here. Lol." End quote. 1348 Ex Voto was that cinematic narrative action game set in medieval Italy. Cool idea, but sadly it seems like it hasn't hit the mark with its ambitions. A weak 53 on OpenCritic, DualShockers gave this one a brutal 4 out of 10, saying, quote, "Unfortunately, the whole experience is let down by a variety of glitches, fundamental design flaws with the combat, confusing levels, and several jarring story transitions that make it seem as if 1348 Ex Voto was shoved out the door before it was ready," end quote. Ouch. Also a bit of a bummer was the RPG Greedfall 2: The Dying World, which came out of early access last week. A weak 65 on OpenCritic for that one. Here's Rhiannon Bevan at The Gamer, who gave it 3.5 out of 5, saying, quote, "On the one hand, this prequel improves upon so much of its predecessor. The new combat system, ditching action for real time with the ability to pause, is exactly the right direction for the series. The world and map designs are also much better now, rewarding exploration and finally representing this incredible fantasy world as it always ought to have been. But then, as you turn a corner, something doesn't quite work. The writing gets worse. A fight sequence feels like nothing but a mindless grind. The vision is lost. The Dying World delivered on enough of the potential we saw in Greedfall. It just makes it more frustrating when it falls short," end quote. Jumping now to the clear winner from last week, Monster Hunter Stories 3 Twisted Reflection, which honestly surprised a lot of us here with a mighty 85 on OpenCritic. Austin reviewed this one for us and absolutely loved it. Link below the like button. Here's friend of the show, Jake Decker over at GameSpot, who hit this one with a 9 out of 10, saying, quote, "I've always thought of the story sub-series as a commendable yet modest spin-off series, but Monster Hunter Stories 3 Twisted Reflection is anything but modest. It takes Monster Hunter's core loop and successfully translates it into turn-based combat, evolving the monster taming genre thanks to habitat restoration, and does all this while telling a thrilling story with a great presentation. Monster Hunter Stories 3 Twisted Reflection easily stands shoulder to shoulder with some of the best Monster Hunter games," end quote. Strong words, and funnily enough, that's exactly what Austin said too. A quick check-in with Thomas and Friends Wonders of Sodor. Ed was really excited about the weirdness of a train simulator mashed up with Thomas the Tank Engine and says it's okay from what little he's played so far. Definitely some solid nostalgia here, but he'll probably go back on account of all the great videos going up on social media that depict Thomas meeting his untimely end at the hands of the Unreal Engine physics engine. Like so. Anyway, very positive rating on Steam for this one with 206 reviews counted. Looks like a pretty safe pick if you're into the source material. And finally, Crimson Desert reviews have landed. No reviews for console versions of the game at the time of writing, so we will circle back on that next week because that's definitely a point of concern. But this highly anticipated behemoth is currently sitting at a respectable 79 on OpenCritic, though it's definitely got a huge spread in the review scores, everything from 5s up to 10s. Having seen and heard people play this in preview sessions before, it definitely seemed like it would be a very divisive title, and though a few of the reviews we've read so far tend to share many of the same talking points, where those reviews ultimately landed came down to individual preferences. We'll pick one at either side of the spectrum to show you what we mean. Here's Will Borger, who gave this 5 out of 10 for Shack News, saying, quote, "There's a lot about Crimson Desert to like. It has some neat combat ideas, and the world's size and scope are genuinely impressive. I've spilled a lot of ink here and probably haven't touched on a 10th of what you can do. Crimson Desert is an absolutely massive game. Unfortunately, the characters aren't interesting, the story is often nonsensical, the inventory system is awful, the boss fights are lousy, the world feels artificial, and terrible at teaching you how to play and often waste your time. Crimson Desert is an exercise in excess, and it's worse for it. If you believe more is always better and are so enraptured by big world that you are willing to overlook substantial glaring flaws, and there are many, you'll love Crimson Desert. Perhaps the most damning thing I can say about Crimson Desert is that it's an enormous game with a ton of content, and I spent most of my time wishing I was doing anything else," end quote. Ouch. Meanwhile, here's Molly Taylor for PC Gamer, who landed at an 80 out of 100, saying, quote, "Crimson Desert is a game that tries to do it all. Jack of all trades, master of some perhaps. If you can think of it, this video game probably has it. While it creates a lack of focus in parts, I also can't help but feel weirdly endeared to it all. It's not as shallow as an open world collectathon, but it doesn't quite have the mechanical intricacies of, say, Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 or Red Dead Redemption 2. If those games are Forza, Crimson Desert is Forza Horizon. It's by far one of the most interesting games I've played. Do I think it's a masterpiece? No, but its scale is genuinely something to marvel at. Trying to dissect and critique its imposing mountain of systems and features is like trying to explain how I feel about each individual leaf on a redwood tree, small fragments of something grand, and whose foliage I'm still yet to take in as a whole, but I'm desperate to continue studying it nonetheless," end quote. As for my review, I've said earlier that I was away at GDC last week, so I'm slowly working my way through this one right now. Word is, it's at least 120 hours to roll credits, so don't expect my review anytime soon, especially not with Pokemon Pocopia still having me in an absolute chokehold. I swear to God, Koei Tecmo really created a new type of narcotic right here. So what's coming out this week? Well, it's still pretty quiet around these parts, which is allowing some of the AA games to get on out there, as well as an expansion drop for Nintendo, and also let anyone who was foolish enough to pick up both Pocopia and Crimson Desert and or Monster Hunter Stories some time to catch up. Though let's be real, you're gonna need like 3 months to get through those. We'll kick things off with Trash Goblin, which is coming out on PS5, Xbox, and Switch this week. This one's been out on PC for a little while now, and it's gotten a great rap, so we thought it's worth a mention here too. It's a shop management game where you're running a fantasy repair place, cleaning and recycling trash to then sell it on. A nice one to chill out with if you're not on the Pocopia train. If you're looking for something on the other side of the spectrum, you probably can't go wrong with this next one, Screamer. So this was a PC arcade racing game from the MS-DOS days, which they've decided to reboot and reimagine as an anime-infused Japanese street racing game, where each character handles their car a little differently and where animated story beats play a big part. Interesting idea, and developer Milestone have been around for quite a while developing games like MotoGP, Ride, and those Hot Wheels Unleashed games, which were way better than everyone expected them to be. A lot of racing experience on show here, so this could be one to watch. PC, PS5, and Xbox Series consoles for this one. Like Milestone, Arc Systems Works is best known for one genre, fighting games. But this week, they're releasing a top-down action-adventure game called Damon and Baby as part of their initiative to branch out and try smaller projects in vastly different genres. From what we can tell, it's kind of like a Metroidvania, but with twin-stick shooting as the core combat. Quite a coincidence that this game came out the same month after the excellent Mini-Shoot Adventures came out on console too. But we're also really digging this cute mashup of modern urban setting, fused with the supernatural, and also like assault rifles and rocket launchers. This one's coming to all platforms. If that game sounded a bit too strange for you, then let me give you a piece of advice. Life is strange. Reunion is also a game that's coming out on Thursday. Life is Strange Reunion. It's bringing back the beloved narrative adventure series and giving the die-hard fans another thing to get really upset about. This time it's bringing back one of the protagonists from the first Life is Strange game, Chloe Price, who either did or did not die at the end, depending on what you did and whether you want to be spoiled about that game or not. So she's back in a big way, and a contingent of fans think that that's a very bad idea, and how dare they? But Deck 9 and Square Enix reckon they have a good reason to do it. We'll see, I guess. PC, PS5, and Xbox Series consoles for this one. We don't usually highlight a lot of pure psychological horror games, but one game called Project Songbird caught our eye this week, and the vibe for this one is pitched as a cross between What Remains of Edith Finch and Alan Wake, and the vibe of an A24 film, which sounds right up our alley. You play a musician who's recording their album in a cabin in the woods to try to break out of their writer's block, and of course, things get scary. PC, PS5, and Xbox Series consoles for this one. And finally, let's not end on the scary one. Let's do Super Mario Bros. Wonder Nintendo Switch 2 Edition plus meet up in Bella Bell Park. Nintendo, we have got to talk about these naming conventions. This paid update adds Rosalina as a playable character, a new flower-based power-up, as well as adding a bunch of co-op and multiplayer courses and minigames in the new Bella Bell Park area. Will it be to Mario Wonder what Phantom Liberty was to Cyberpunk? Avid viewers of this channel will know that that question makes no sense, and you will be wondering if I've had a stroke. All right, so I know we already had a Disco Elysium like on this segment a couple of weeks ago, but here's another one coming out soon that we played an early build of and we really enjoyed. So put this on your radar. This is Aether and Iron, and I don't think I've heard the term Deco Punk before, but this is a Deco Punk game set in an alternate reality 1930s, where Art Deco meets futuristic anti-grav technology for a pretty cool world concept, and also features a lot of high-speed anti-grav car battles that play out in turn-based tactical fashion. That's not the half of it, of course. If you couldn't tell by the user interface, this is also a narrative-heavy RPG with choices and consequences. You play a smuggler who eventually gets embroiled in various shady conspiracies. You'll upgrade your car for both battle and smuggling goods, put together a crew of various misfits, and upgrade your shady character traits to try to weasel your way out of various social situations with dice rolls. It's got a great, unique art style, really solid writing, great voice acting, and some clever scenarios based on the couple of times we've played it over the years. And the soundtrack also features music by Christopher Tin, who wrote that Civ 4 theme song. Fun fact, first piece of video game music to ever win a Grammy, even before it had a dedicated category. Anyway, this comes out on PC and Mac on March 31st. And there's also a free demo still available on Steam, which we think is worth checking out. If you do want to check it out, we've left a link to it over on our Steam curator page, which also has links to all of the other Put This On Your Radar stuff we've recently covered. I'll leave a link to all of that below the like button. Well, we promised it earlier, and now it's time to deliver. This week's feel-good story for the week has got to be a roundup of the best DLSS 5 dunks we saw throughout a glorious week of dunks. I think this reimagined Disco Elysium portrait is a good starting point. Clearly, this is what Zalm would have liked Harry to look like had they only had access to the technology to make it so. Todd Howard put himself front and center with this technology, so it feels only right that he gets the DLSS 5 filter as well. Let's take a look. Yep, definitely an improvement there. Slay Queen. Official game developer accounts got in on the action too. Here's Inner Sloth showing their vision for a DLSS 5 enabled Among Us, but I think Cult of the Lamb did it better. To be honest though, I think the funniest discourse was people linking the Death Stranding 2 character stuff that was doing the rounds last year, where Kojima and his team did a suspiciously excellent job of capturing the natural beauty of its subjects without the use of AI upscalers. There's variations on the retweet text, but they're always something along the lines of this one, quote, "The machine can never replace the craft of a real pervert," end quote. Indeed. Thank you for your service, Kojima-san. And thank you for tuning in to another huge episode of This Week in Video Games. We've got a very exciting week coming up, actually. Austin is doing some secret travel right now for something really cool, so do look forward to his coverage going up next week. I'm going to be no life in Crimson Desert until the neighbors start complaining about a bad smell coming from my office. And we're also welcoming a new team member to our website, thisweekinvideogames.com, but I'll save that introduction for next week. By the way, did you know that it was also my birthday yesterday? That's right. Did you get me a present? No, you didn't, but now is your chance to do just that. Please drop the video a like. Likes are literally the best presents you can get any YouTuber. Well, actually, that's not quite true. Hitting the subscribe button and ding the notification bell, they're the real cheese, but I don't want to get greedy. Anyway, thank you again for watching. Really do appreciate your time. Take good care of yourselves, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.